So we're going to talk about from trip to stewardship. So my name is Peter Dresch. I am on our mission impacts evaluation team at SeaLife Center. I also do program evaluating for the Coral Network that Sean was talking about a little earlier. My boss, Dr. Don Frazier, is in Anchorage attending a tourism expo, which is really helpful for us. We're going to talk a little bit about that tourism and what it means to the center, and we're going to try to do social sciences justice, even though this is kind of Johnny's wheelhouse, but I feel like I got a pretty solid grasp on it. So today we're going to be talking about the social sciences for a regenerative ecology, and specifically how we can use conservation psychology, this field that I'll go into detail, as a lens to use as a force towards stewardship, right? So conservation psychology, so just keep that in your amazing picture. People come to the SeaLife Center, people come to Seward really because they want to engage with this exotic experience. They want to experience raw nature up close, and they have a lot of these, conservation values. The climate and the environment here is really different from where our guests are coming from. So I think it's a real intimate experience, and we have a really good platform to be able to help drive change. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit today about changing values and behaviors that happen from those values, and how we can ultimately act on that. The scope of this work is really hard because we're going to be talking about how to essentially make sure that our visitors are kind of leaving their experience at the center, with some of these values, with some of these behaviors, right? That we hope that they can instill some of that in their communities, right? But the scope is really hard because how do we, what are the tools and how do we, communicate that? How many people can we reach, especially during our busy months in the summer? So I spoke about conservation psychology, which is what we're going to focus on today, but this all stems from conservation biology, and these are all kind of, disciplines, that fall underneath, conservation biology. But essentially, it is, it's a way to make the biological sciences and the geophysical sciences, it's basically a way to make that, a cause for, basically social change, right? So conservation biology was all about how we can basically unite into, a unified front to basically work towards, promoting and conserving biodiversity for the planet. And so this is around 1985. This was ultimately, accepted, as a field, and these are adjacent fields, under that. And ultimately, we're 50 years into the Anthropocene here, right? Which is, the point at which, we know that humans are the primary driver of the ecological and the environmental change, that we're seeing. And so it's absolutely a crisis. And a lot of these work in these subdisciplines are super important. But the one thing that we're not, the one thing I think lacks, there's a lot of opportunity for, is that on the public side, we're not seeing action that can combat some of the changes that we're seeing happening here. And so in, turn of the millennium, conservation psychology was introduced. And it's basically, social scientists got together and they wanted to understand, and they sought to understand the ways that we can understand how human behavior shifts and how it can be measured. These are all the subdisciplines, that kind of derive from this conservation psychology. So this brings us to the central notion of conservation, not being science itself, right? Because conservation in and of itself is a humanities question, right? So it's the moral choices that we make to prioritize some behaviors over others. The science of human behavior change is a science because large-scale human behavior is predictable. But the individual choices that we make and our groups make, those are moral decisions. Just want to keep that in mind. So again, conservation biology, focus on species, habitats, the planet, changes happening to the planet. Conservation psychology is focusing on people and social change, social constructs, and social systems. And the way that we can kind of dissect those constructs are by looking at shifts in those values, those norms, and behavior. So this diagram represents the values, beliefs, norms theory that came about around 1990s. And basically, it says that, our beliefs are driven by our values, right? And their norms are driven by beliefs, right? What we choose, with the environment, what we choose to, be a risk, right? It's like the path of holding value for the biosphere that, leads to those negative consequences, right? And those norms ultimately lead to behaviors, right? To activism. Right? So when we're social activists, we're challenging those systems that we, kind of feel are unjust. But this diagram lacks, this theory lacks, one huge component, right? And that's like collective group identity, collective group decision making. So values, beliefs, and norms, right? This diagram now incorporates collective group identity, right? So it's basically, all this is saying is, the groups that we choose to associate with, right? Those are where our values are, derived from. So this new model of collective identity, right? Beliefs, norms, people are more likely to behave in the way the group wanted them to. So those influence behaviors ahead of any change in values, essentially. So all that to say is that, you are in a group, right, and they provide, affirmation and a sense of belonging, right? And, obviously your belief and your values change. But this model is very, this model is very American, and it's very individualistic. So that's why at the SeaLife Center we look specifically at action research. So it's what we do, who we work with, understanding how our work can lead to more stewardship of our marine environment. So basically we can use the economic kind of base of tourism in Seward as a justification for this stewardship cause, right? And this stewardship, the stewardship cause we're trying to promote. So roughly this summer, 170,000 visitors, a third of them came from cruise ships, right? A lot of the visitors generated $51 million in Seward spending, and then roughly a third are non-Seward Alaskans, right? So just keep that in mind.
Was that to the SeaLife Center, 170,000?
I believe this was this past summer.
To the
visitors at the SeaLife Center, yeah. So just using this demographic, right? It was also my boss, Dr. Frazier, put out a happiness survey in town kind of before in the summer, and it showed that Seward was the 10th happiest city in America and obviously the happiest city in Alaska. And this held true, and we can actively promote that happiness. And again, people come to Seward, come to the SeaLife Center to experience that joy and nature up close and personal. So we can just keep that in mind. So this summer we had a survey that we put out on the floor. We called it an intercept survey. We got over 1,700 people to partake in the survey through QR codes, or we had iPads around the floor that we would ask guests to fill out. And one of the questions was on connectedness to nature. And so we gave them 7 diagrams. Here there's only 3. But essentially, you pick 1 through 7, 1 being very disconnected from nature, and 7 being, you and nature are essentially one. And so you guys can, kind of do it now, ponder among yourself where you feel like you fall. And keeping in mind, Alaska residents, we had Seward residents, the lower 48 and international, all, answering this question. So ultimately what we found out, and the poster that we put together demonstrate this in more detail, but essentially 1 being least connected to nature, 7 being most connected to nature. Seward residents compared to Alaskan residents really connected much more with nature, right? These 6s and 7s being more connected, way bigger pieces of the pie than other Alaskan residents, and this was true for residents in the lower 48 as well. So I think that this is a critical thing that we can leverage. If as a SeaLife Center, if we have these values and we are trying to change behaviors, these are also the values of our community here in Seward. And I think when people come from elsewhere and they maybe have different values or different behaviors than us, like we want to tell them this is a place that believes that regenerative ecology is possible. We're actively working to we're actively working towards that solution through the various means, right? Research, rehabilitation, top high quality husbandry care. So basically just using that as a tool. And so basically another thing that we found from the survey was that visitors, were kind of asking for direction or materials or recommendations on things that they can do in their network to bring about kind of social change, right? And this is not about giving money to the center or to Seward, and although those things are great, it's really about giving them the guidance on what they can do at home, to make some small changes in their community or their network, right? Because we are in the business of growing knowledge, and we're finding that our visitors are asking us what they can do, and we should be kind of telling them and using our platform to do so. So still to come, so we got our survey from this summer also asked about media consumption habits, purchasing habits, travel logistics, where people were coming from, how they were coming. And it was really insightful, and we're doing a lot of our analysis, but this kind of benchmark data, really can inform like how we want to shift our story to better build stewards of our marine environment. So we're excited to work with some departments internally to figure out like how best can we use this information, to really understand our visitors so that we can kind of curate our experience to them. I think that's all I got. Encourage questions.
So are you saying you're still developing that list of things to tell the visitors how to change their own networks and communities? Or do you have that list?
I think the survey was really valuable in that it demonstrated a baseline of what Seward residents Alaskans are saying and residents from the lower 48. And I think we're still kind of doing our analysis to figure out, okay, what are the best ways to then communicate that? So the survey asked about media and spending habits, and we can use some of that to, whether it might be a marketing strategy or we're still trying to determine some of those things. With that.
Did anything surprise you after doing the interest of surveys?
Anything surprise us? I think that there was a lot of people from Texas that come here, and a lot of people that have homes in Alaska that spend most of the year elsewhere. And we had really enthusiastic Alaskans, people down from Anchorage for the day, or the other side of the peninsula, and they really were excited to fill out the survey. We're happy and surprised that we were asking them. I think that they thought it was more geared towards international tourists or people from the lower 48. So it was really cool to see that their data was in their input, kind of mattered, and we wanted to stress that it was really important that we heard from Alaskans and obviously Seward residents. But yeah, so that was surprising.
Given that, I think you said 30% of the visitors came from cruise ships. I'm wondering if you asked like whether they chose to come to the SeaLife Center or it was dished up as the shore excursion for the day.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that a lot of the cruise ships bundle their offerings, so where the SeaLife Center is like one of the things that you do in town before you take the train up to wherever else. I'm not sure what percentage of cruise ships visitors were a part of that bundled experience. I know I was trying to study all summer like what port of call, port of turn was, like when the boat was in. Still don't fully.
Actually, most of our ships are. Yeah, that's right. They're not staying. The people aren't staying.
Yeah, right. And so some cruise ship passengers would get off the boat and not see Seward at all. Like they would go up to Denali. And so that's a good question. I'm not sure that our survey can fully answer that, but it's good to know which visitors have the option to come here and are doing so, and not just like have already paid for that experience. Yeah.